Tracking the Tropics Update with the certified most accurate weather team at First Coast News.
Good evening, folks. I am meteorologist Ross Mumal here with you this evening. Toby, do you have this logged into Max 2?
I'll do it.
We're going to get the graphics figured out here for you, but the latest from the National Hurricane Center just came in on Hurricane Milton, the 8 p.m. advisory. Now, sustained winds still of about 120 miles per hour. The pressure has increased just slightly now to 954 millibars. So it is gradually weakening, but it's going to be a very, very slow process. Only about 20 miles to the west and southwest of Sarasota. It looks like we're probably less than an hour away from landfall. We'll get a much closer look at that here in just a little bit. But again, here's the latest look at the cone from the National Hurricane Center. So it still is a major Category 3 storm. Again, likely less than an hour, minutes away potentially from the landfall there, just to the south of Tampa, near the Bradenton and Sarasota area. Chief Meteorologist Tim Deegan just came in. He gave me a couple reports here. We've seen sustained wind gusts in and around that area, the Sarasota International Airport, between about 40 to 50, even 55 miles per hour. But now a 96 mile per hour wind gust has been reported in Sarasota. That is the highest wind gust we've seen reported so far here this evening. That is certainly a very strong hurricane force wind there being reported in the Sarasota area. Now, thankfully, we are not expecting that here on the First Coast. Worse wind gusts will certainly be across our more southern counties, Putnam, Flagler, and really the southern half of St. Johns County. And then out along the beaches, you have that water overrunning some of those very, very warm, or the wind overrunning those very, very warm ocean waters will increase some of those. But one last look here. We've kind of been showing this over the past couple of days. No longer a hurricane watch in effect for Nassau Duval County. That has been decreased down now to just a tropical storm warning. So some very good news there. I believe Charlton and Brandley County also taken out of the tropical storm warning and tropical storm watch. So we now just really have the hurricane warning in effect for St. Johns, Flagler, and Putnam counties. And then for the remainder of our northeast Florida counties and Glenn and Camden, we just have a tropical storm warning in effect, along with the storm surge warning for all of our beachfront, our intercoastal areas, and then some of our major rivers. That's going to be the Trout River, the St. Johns River. Could see some storm surge issues here, particularly overnight tonight and really closer to sunrise than tomorrow morning. Now, live wind gusts, or wind direction, I should say, wind speed, not too bad, at least for the time being. Sustained anywhere from about 15 to 20, 25 miles per hour. Certainly going to be gustier out there at the beaches. 36 mile per hour gusts in St. Augustine right now. So these are just going to gradually continue to pick up here over the next several hours. So here's a live look at Hurricane Milton as it makes its way on shore. Again, we're waiting for word from the National Hurricane Center, likely within at least the next 30 to 45 minutes of a landfall there just to the south of Tampa. Now, we had a pretty potent stretch of tornado-warned storms all across central and south Florida. That line has now moved off the Atlantic coast there, moving out over the very warm ocean waters from the Gulf Stream. You can see all the lightning there on the far eastern side of the storm. We will watch for a potential tornado risk for some of our southern counties later on here, but for the time being, not too concerned with that. Zooming in though, again, that eye just about to move on shore. What it looks to be just a few miles potentially south of Sarasota. So in between Sarasota and Siesta Key, north of the Fort Myers area, is where that landfall will likely be. Now, probably that center of circulation, I put this track on maybe about 10 minutes ago, had it at about 15 miles. So that is where that center of circulation, where that center of the lowest pressure is at, likely now less than 15 miles offshore. So we're talking much closer to probably 10 to 5 miles offshore. So likely within a matter of minutes, this thing is officially going to make landfall there just to the south of the Sarasota area. Track-wise, not much has changed. It's going to move on shore. It's going to track parallel to the I-4 corridor, so south of Orlando, and then out toward, or will then move offshore near the Melbourne area and the Space Coast. The worst weather for us will likely be right around about 6 a.m. So 5, 6, 7 a.m. That is when the storm will pass due south of the most populated areas here across the First Coast. So that's when we're really expecting the worst of the rain and the wind to then gradually begin to subside after about 6 to 7 a.m. So it's not all going to get bad at once and then disappear. It will be a gradual incline and then decline back down with regards to how much rain we see and also those wind gusts as well. But live look for you a little bit closer to home here, out across the First Coast. Live radar, all the rain has continued to shift further and further north. So for a lot of folks really north of I-10 didn't see all that much rain so far here today. That is now beginning to change. I know Jacksonville Airport's picked up about 1/4 of an inch of rain, but most of us are now seeing at least steady rainfall falling across the First Coast, blowing sideways, especially out at the beaches where you're going to start to see some of those gustier winds begin to pick up. But really the heaviest hit areas have been where we expected, where the highest rain totals have been forecasted for, out across southern St. Johns County, much of Flagler, just a small southeast corner of Clay County, and the eastern half of Putnam County for Palatka, the Willaca area. Flash flood warnings are in effect there. They've seen ponding on roadways, fields have been flooded out, and really all across the First Coast we have begun to see at least some drainage issues and some street flooding, especially when high tide came in a few hours ago. Now we're headed towards low tide, or just about there right now. So those concerns will start to decrease, at least for a few hours, with regards to the drainage backup, and then they will begin to worsen again as we get closer to high tide between about 2 and 4 a.m. overnight tonight. Now, let's look at kind of what the future track or future cast is showing for Hurricane Milton here. So continued steady rainfall, moderate to even heavy rain at times, especially across some of our more southern areas throughout the remainder of this evening. Then after midnight tonight, winds will continue to pick up, sustained anywhere from about 20 to upwards of 40 miles per hour for Jacksonville and Duval County. So that is a sustained wind. Wind gusts could be upwards of 50 to 60, if not 65 miles per hour, I think at most for Duval County. And those would generally be out along the St. Johns River and out at the beachfront. So if you do live out at the beaches, similar to what we saw with Hurricane Helene just 2 weeks ago, that's where those strongest wind gusts will certainly be. And those will just increase in strength the further south you go. So for the St. Augustine area, the Palm Coast area, sustained winds could be anywhere from 30 to 50 miles per hour, with wind gusts closer to about 70 to 80 miles per hour at the high end for you folks down there in St. Augustine and Palm Coast. But the rain will continue to stick with us up until about sunrise tomorrow. So 6, 7 a.m., then the rain finally begins to move offshore. We got a lot of dry air kind of getting pulled in or filtering in on the western, backside of the hurricane. That's really going to cause a very steep gradient on who sees very, very heavy rain, and then very quickly the rain tapers off and you actually have dry skies behind it. So the rain will end somewhat abruptly, but the winds behind it will still be very, very strong. So although it may not be raining at, let's say, 9 or 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, the winds will still be a concern. Storm surge, also a concern, about 2 to 4 feet potentially for the St. Johns River. At 4 feet, you get close to the water coming up into backyards, potentially into homes and businesses. We think that is the upper echelon of where the storm surge could reach. So more than likely it'll be about 2 to 3 feet, which is less than what we experienced with Hurricane Irma. So we are not expecting significant flooding from the storm surge actually coming, up over the river and into your home or your business. Now, with the amount of rain we have seen and will continue to see throughout the remainder of tonight, combine the rainfall with high tide and about a 2 to 3 foot storm surge, that's when you could maybe see really just the drainage system beginning to fail a little bit, backing up into the streets and things like that. So that's really our main concern, not only for the St. Johns River, but also for the intercoastal area as well. So again, 8 p.m. advisory from the National Hurricane Center, still a Category 3 storm. It is making landfall here as we speak. As soon as we get the information that it is official, we'll have that to you. We'll have another update coming up at 9 o'clock. But first, I want to bring in anchor Anthony Austin. He's been working with us here all night, doing a great job, and he's got some viewer questions for us here tonight as well. Anthony?
That's right, Ross. Thank you for that great explanation that you just gave our audience here on YouTube and Facebook as we continue to keep you updated on Milton. I do want to let all of you know who are watching right now, I am able to see your questions. So if you have any questions, just feel free to type it in right here in this live, and I can ask Ross those questions for you. So, Ross, one question we've been getting a lot. So we all saw that video. Well, a lot of us have seen that video from South Florida today of that tornado. I mean, it was just an amazing image to see. And so some people are wondering, in our area, are we going to see tornadoes like what we saw in South Florida today?
So thankfully, the risk is going to be very low for most of us, especially I-10 North. The risk isn't zero, but it's very close to that. With some context here, Hurricane Helene, we were in that front right quadrant, kind of in the dirty side of the storm. So that's why we saw so many tornado warnings with Helene. Today, now with Hurricane Milton, Central and South Florida, we're in that right front quadrant where you generally see the most tornado risk and those quick spin-ups. Thankfully, we're on the north side of Milton this time around, so potentially Flagler County, maybe southern St. John's and Putnam might see a very small isolated risk tonight, but for the most part, we are not all that concerned about the tornado risk this evening, especially really from World Golf Village north. So most of Clay County and then all of Duval, Nassau County, and north and west from there, we're not too concerned about the tornado risk. So southern tier areas have a very minimal risk tonight.
All right, I think that's some good news for all of our viewers today, for everyone in the area. So another question that we're getting, Ross, it seems like a lot of people need to fly out of the Jacksonville airport tomorrow, and also a lot of people have questions about the bridges. So this is an email that Cindy actually sent to me during our newscast. She said, we have a flight leaving before noon on October 10th. Do you think the bridges will be open, like the Dames Point, for example, so we can get to the airport around 10 a.m.?
So the Dames Point may temporarily close before 10 a.m. Again, we think those strongest wind gusts will be really between, let's say, 4 and 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. After that, the winds will slowly taper off. It'll still be windy, but the wind gusts will not be of tropical storm force wind gusts at that point. So there may be a temporary closure for the Dames Point, but even if that is closed, you can still get across the Main Street Bridge up into the airport. So I would not be too concerned about, getting delayed with regards to the wind gusts from getting to the airport. Now, if we do get some 60 to 70, even 80 mile per hour wind gusts, especially across some of our southern areas, that down some trees, they pull down power lines or something like that, that could then, cause some travel delays. So Anthony, I think, people might have to keep that in mind, that although the actual weather conditions might be improving and they think they can get out, if there's damage or power lines are down, you have tree limbs down in the road, that could certainly cause some issues.
Let's talk about St. Johns County and Fruit Cove. I'm seeing a lot of questions about those areas in our chat right now. So during the newscast earlier, we saw some pictures, especially from southern St. Johns County, where they were already seeing some flooding in that area. And also, I know that the emergency management team there in St. Johns County, they're asking people to conserve water until 5 p.m. Friday, I do believe, just because kind of the impact on the wastewater system there. So can you kind of talk about what people in St. Johns County and Fruit Cove can expect with this storm?
So on top of the rainfall you've already seen, you could see an additional 4 to 5 inches of rain, if not more than that, especially as Milton moves further eastward and more onshore. The heaviest rain is still to come. So certainly warranted with those water concerns there in the Fruit Cove and area in St. Johns County in general. So the accumulation of the rainfall will certainly still cause some major concerns for street flooding, especially Fruit Cove's right there along the St. Johns River. High tide between about 2 and 4 a.m. depending on where exactly you're at there on the St. Johns. You combine high tide with the accumulated rain and the storm surge that could be, for there I'd say closer to about 1 to 2 feet. Homes and businesses right along there could see just drainage backup. So that's where you're going to see the street flooding, not necessarily coming out of the river itself. Wind gusts there overnight could be anywhere from 60 to 70 miles per hour for the Fruit Cove area and that portion of St. Johns County. Further south, you have the potential for 70 to 80, but I think likely about 60 to 70 mile per hour wind gusts could be seen. And also you got to keep in mind just how saturated the ground has been, not only in St. Johns County, Anthony, but really everywhere. not only from, the rain that we saw through the first half of September, but also the rain we saw this past weekend. If you went to the Jags game, it was a kind of a miserable day out there, pretty rainy and misty. So the ground's very saturated. You get a wind gust of 60 to 70. It does not necessarily take all that much to knock down either a weak tree with some shallow roots or just an older tree that is really just waiting on one strong gust to knock it over. So certainly keep that in mind as well. If you think you have strong, sturdy trees around you that won't fall down, they certainly could, especially just with how wet the ground still is.
You know what? That was actually my next question for you, because Casey was asking.
See, I'm thinking
I know
ahead.
we're on the same wavelength here. You know what people want to know. Casey asked if we had large trees fall with Helene. Do you think we will with this one? She lives in Arlington near the St. Johns River, near the back of Fort Caroline. So you mentioned there, since the ground is so saturated, that is a risk.
And Duval County, I think sustained wind and wind gust wise will be very, very similar to what we saw with Helene. So with Helene, we saw 30 to 40 mile per hour sustained winds with wind gusts upwards, especially in the Arlington area, between about 60 and 70. The beaches saw about 75 to 80. I think that is the max end of what we'll see with Milton here overnight tonight and into tomorrow as well. So conditions wise, it'll be very, very similar for Jacksonville and Duval.
Okay. Let's see what else we have here. What are some of your other questions? Feel free to ask it. Ross, I'm going to look here at some of the other questions that our viewers were asking early. So we talked about the tornado outbreaks. Let's see here. You talked about the winds. How about the latest on Putnam County? Karen wants to know.
So Putnam County, very similar to southern St. Johns County. Wind gusts will increase substantially after 4 a.m. So think 4, 5, 6, 7 a.m. will be really the height of the wind for you, and potentially also heaviest rainfall as well. Sustained winds between about 40 to 50 miles per hour. Wind gusts 65 to 70, potentially upwards of 75 to 80. A few isolated gusts are possible, but based off of the wind gusts that we are seeing down towards Sarasota and Bradenton, where it's moving on shore right now, of 90 to 96 mile per hour wind gusts, I think over the next several hours as Milton continues to move on land and on shore, those wind gusts will come down. So I am thinking, Putnam County and the Palatka area, you're probably looking at worst, a 70 to 75 mile per hour wind gust. Now, that's still bad. That still could certainly cause tree damage, bring some power lines down. Minor roof damage is also a possibility there as well. And the rainfall, again, I've talked a lot about that, but still could see in total for the storm about 6 to 12 inches in the Palatka area, which could certainly lead to some street flooding there as well, Anthony.
And we also have a science question from Mary. She kind of wants to know, what is steering this storm? Can you answer that?
Yeah, so we have a big upper level trough dipping down across kind of the Great Lakes region in the northeast. So that's now kind of moving in across the southeast portion of the country. So a big upper level trough. The jet stream is grabbing a hold of it. At the surface, we do have a surface front kind of associated on the western and northern side of that. That's really the reason why we're experiencing a lot of wind shear on the storm. If you can kind of see it on that western edge, it's kind of a straight line or a real nice curve on the western side of the storm. That is due to the wind shear and dry air now getting pulled in on the back side of this system. So it's really this upper level jet stream and trough and surface cold front that is going to eventually continue to drag it to the east. Hopefully I explained that well.
Yeah, I think that made sense. I get what you're saying. We also have some of our viewers who are up in southeast Georgia. They kind of want to know what they can expect up there. For example, Tana, she asked, do you have any update for Glenn County?
So about a 1 to 2 foot storm surge there for Glenn County, so the Brunswick area could see a minor storm surge. Wind gusts closer to about 40 to 50, maybe 55 miles per hour at most. So not nearly as bad as some of the folks will experience further to the south there down the I-95 corridor. So sustained winds about 20 to 30, wind gusts 50 to 55, rainfall upwards of maybe an inch or two of rain at most. The further north you go and further west you go with this storm throughout the remainder of tonight, it is going to be a very, very steep drop off in rainfall. So think from Jacksonville to Folkston, there will it will be much drier in Folkestone than it will be in Jacksonville, talking about how much rain you actually see, and even more so than the further, to the northwest you go, up towards Blackshear, Waycross, and similar story straight out of I-10 towards Lake City, which is, really a blessing in disguise for some of those areas that were hardest hit with Helene just 2 weeks ago. They do not need any more rain.
Right.
They do not need any more, strong winds. So they certainly will still see, some of it, but not nearly as bad as folks will, down in Flagler and St. Johns counties.
And I'm seeing some questions about power outages. Can we expect power outages? And with the winds, we definitely can. That is a possibility.
Yes, I would at least prepare for the potential for widespread power outages in Flagler, Southern St. Johns, and Putnam. It is a possibility. I'm not saying that it will 100% happen, but it certainly is a possibility. Now, for Jacksonville, we will have some isolated power outages, primarily just due to, some of those maybe older trees knocking out a power line or something like that. But we are not expecting, widespread power outages, at least in the Jacksonville area, and for really most of Duval County. Now, again, the beachfront and the beaches will likely experience the strongest wind gusts. So if you live anywhere, from Mayport down to Atlantic and Neptune Beach, down to Ponte Vedra, Jack's Beach even, don't be surprised if you do, lose power for at least a little bit, maybe overnight tonight. And when you first wake up tomorrow morning, your alarm might not be going off because you lost power. But certainly not in the way that you would lose it for days here in, Duval County and I would say the northern half of St. Johns County.
So, Ross, we both are dog owners, and we were actually discussing this earlier, and I think this is a very valid question from Kenneth, because there's probably a lot of people wondering with this storm. He says, what do you think would be a good time that I can take the dog out?
Well, that is a good question. You still have time now. Yes, it is raining. I just got a video of my dog out there playing in the rain in the mud. So within the next couple of hours before you head to bed, take him out. Tomorrow morning, after about 8 to 9 a.m., conditions will gradually begin to improve. The rain itself will start to subside and move off the coast shortly after sunrise tomorrow morning. So think 7, 8, 9 a.m., kind of that 2 to 3 hour window. The rain will continue to move offshore. It will still be windy behind it. We could see sustained winds, I think 20 to 30 around that 8 to 9 a.m. window. Wind gusts, particularly at the beaches and especially from St. Augustine south, could still be upwards of 40 to 60 miles per hour. But that will just continue to decrease throughout the day. So I would say after 8 to 9 a.m., if you live, specifically in Jacksonville, you should be safe to take your pup out after that point. The further to the south and southeast you live, it's going to be a little bit later in the morning. You might have to wait until, mid-morning to even close to lunchtime to really, take your pup for a walk or something out there and maybe, assess some of the potential damage we could see.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Ross. I think that's really kind of sums up all the questions that we have. I don't know if you want to just kind of do a quick overview to wrap things up for people who may have just now joined our live chat.
Yeah, so again, this is 8:30 now. National Hurricane Center just put out a new advisory. I would suspect that is because it may or may not have made landfall. I don't know. Toby and Bella, have you gotten word on anything? Nothing? Okay. Well, it will likely be within the hour at most of this storm making landfall, continuing to gradually increase that pressure, so it will weaken. It will move across central Florida as still a Category 1 hurricane at that point, so it will decrease and downgrade, but for the time being, still a major Category 3 storm making landfall there near the Sarasota and Siesta Key area along the Gulf Coast. Local impacts will worsen after midnight tonight for many of us, so expect rainfall to increase. High tide between 2 to 4 a.m. will also heighten the threat of not only the storm surge, but also just the flooding. Storm surge threat we've talked a lot about as well, and the wind gusts. For Duval, 40 to 60 mile per hour wind gusts. Southward, you're talking St. Augustine, down to the Palm Coast, to Palatka, you're thinking much closer to about 60 to 80 mile per hour wind gusts. But we will have another update on First Coast News coming up at 9 p.m. I believe Chief Meteorologist Tim Deegan will have that. But I believe that's all we have for you, at least for right now. So again, he is Anthony Austin. I am meteorologist Ross Mumal. Take care. Thank you for watching. Stay weather aware and stay safe tonight throughout the remainder of the storm.
is a Tracking the Tropics update with the certified most accurate weather team at First Coast News.
Well, hello everyone. Here's the latest on Hurricane Milton. Cat 3 Milton is now a Cat 2, but pretty darn powerful. Sustained winds of 110 miles per hour. Then that position technically is 20 miles northeast of Sarasota, but that is the pinpoint center of the eye. Basically the eye wall, the southern, the eastern, the northern, the western quadrant, all of the whole eye wall scenario is pretty much over different areas of what we call the Tampa Bay metropolitan region. We've now seen numerous reports of gust winds of over 100 miles per hour, and the whole Tampa Bay area from Clearwater to the airport down to Sarasota, Egmont Key, they're going to continue to be pounded with these same conditions. And by the way, copious amounts of rain. I'm not even sure if that word says it correctly. We've seen some reports there in the St. Petersburg area of probably over 17 inches of rain. 17 inches of rain, in addition to the winds gusting to over 100 miles per hour. And of course, some areas have had a storm surge of 9 to 13 feet. We know it was going to be bad for them, exponentially worse for them. But what about for us? Well, I'll tell you, if anything, this has made the turn. Remember, it's heading northeast. Now it's heading east-northeast, basically right along I-4. And at its current speed, first of all, I should say, it really did make landfall several hours before forecast, and that was a forecast from just this afternoon. So we went from yesterday afternoon, where most of the models that we like to use were indicating maybe this is going to take a while making the turn. Maybe it's not going to make landfall until midnight or 2, made it at 8:30. But there's some positive there, at least for us. The quicker this gets across the peninsula, the less additional rainfall we're going to have, the less pounding of the winds, and then the earlier our peak winds will occur, and the earlier the heavy rains will come to an end. So I'm going to put a few things into motion here. Actually, you know what? Why don't we show you the extent of the storm surge? We're going to show you Fort Myers. In fact, I think this is a nighttime shot. Obviously pretty windy, but even Fort Myers and points farther to the south experienced a significant storm surge. And what I mean by that is 6 to 8 feet. So think about that. We're concerned about a 2 to 4 foot storm surge on the St. Johns River, 3 to 5 foot storm surge on the ocean, and yet on the west coast, that is Fort Myers, over 60 to 100 miles away from landfall, they had a significant storm surge of at least 6 to 8 feet. I hope it's not going to end up being more than that, but of course more than that farther off to the north. So even as far away as Fort Myers, being hit really hard. Okay, let's come back to the maps. I want to show you just a couple things, and what I really want to do is have a conversation with you. Have you ask questions, and then Heather is going to be our director, our captain, so to speak. All right, so we're going to zoom on in. Notice the official forecast certainly is for the hurricane to be about 100 miles offshore by 7 p.m. We think it may now get offshore our local waters by as early as 6 to 8. So here's the big picture. I think you can see the eye. Notice the heavy rains are pretty much along the northern part of the eye. Look at all of that lightning out over the Atlantic. We're keeping a close watch on that because that lightning, those are the thunderstorms that produced all of the tornadoes earlier in the day. And some concern that some of those thunderstorms might try to wrap back up toward at least St. Johns County, if not farther to the north. But so far, just by looking at the lightning, we see it heading north. We don't see it coming back yet our way. We'll keep a close watch on that. So there's a look at the big picture. And this is why I have 6 a.m. So our highest wind gust, the beginning of the end of the heaviest rains, will occur at Hurricane Milton's closest pass by us, so to speak. And that's going to be when it's due south of us. And now it's looking like that's going to occur at about 6 a.m. Still the same position we've been talking about really since last night, that it continues along this track east-northeast, basically think I-4 or just south of I-4. Then that would place the eye just before it heads offshore about 150 miles south of St. Augustine, about 120 miles south of NAS Jax. All right, we're going to zoom in those boxes, they're called polygons. That's where the flash flood warnings are right now, pretty much have been all day. And it pretty much lines up where we thought the highest potential for rainfall totals of 10 to 12 inches, maybe more, would be the southern half of St. Johns County, extreme eastern and southern Putnam County, and then points farther off toward the south. So there you see the continuous rain spiraling up. Just picture around the hurricane. But I do want you to look now sort of where my chin is. You see that the western edge? There's a lot going on there, I know. If you look at the ocean, you see a lot of rain coming at us from the ocean. But if you look to the west there, that's over the last 3 hours, that's where the drier air is coming in from the west. And so that's what's going on tonight. That although, yes, you see all of this precipitation spiraling up and around the hurricane, all the while, though, that drier air is coming at us from the west. And I think this picture shows it even more so. And that's going to continue to happen as the hurricane continues to head to the east and northeast at 16. Why is it doing that? Well, the weather map really puts it all together, and it's running right along a front that has been there because of that extreme low pressure. And remember, at Cat 2, we're still talking about a 962 millibar low. That's just low pressure, folks, and high pressure just to our north. So truly, the isobaric squeeze is on between that hurricane and between high pressure. So notice here we are at 2 in the morning. And what I'm showing you on the weather map is really when we will be the windiest and where the largest heavy rainfall shield will occur, between about midnight and 6 to 8 in the morning. Notice what happens by about 7 to 8 in the morning. The spiral, what's left of the eye, heads offshore. The high pressure system repositions itself, and by then, between about 6 and 8, the heaviest rains will go offshore. We're still going to have very gusty winds along the coastline, but then by 10 in the morning, even the tight, we call it gradient, around the hurricane should begin to head offshore as well. We're going to talk much more about that, but one of the biggest questions has been, is it going to be as bad as Irma? As strong as this storm is, and as windy and as heavy as the rains will be, between really now and 8 tomorrow morning, it's not going to be Irma. Check out the numbers. As far as the river levels, at Irma reached about 5 to 7 feet, talking Duval County through St. John's, but even down into Doctor's Inlet and Doctor's Lake, 5 to 7. We're looking 2 to 4 for Milton, so that's about 3 feet lower. That's the difference between just street flooding and getting into homes and businesses. And then real quickly wanted to talk about Matthew. For some oceanfront concerns, we're looking for 3 to 5 feet from Nassau County beaches down to St. Johns County beaches, whereas Matthew was more 5 to 8. But that's enough of me rambling on. Heather, thanks for being here, and Heather is here to be our captain and share some questions. Heather?
Tim, you've done an excellent job. You've been forecasting storms for 40 plus years now. We know Hurricane Milton made landfall tonight around 8:30 in Sarasota County in Siesta Key. The question for a lot of people here on the First Coast is, it's after 10 o'clock at night. A lot of people want to get a restful night's sleep. What's your advice to people as the storm makes its way toward us? It's going to pass to the south of us. But what should people know? What's your advice as they want to head to bed tonight?
Well, first of all, certainly I am all in support of rest. But I understand there might be some anxiety out there. But something else Heather said that was significant. This is going to stay to our south all night and morning, folks. Southwest, south, and then southeast. But what that means is the winds will primarily be out of the same direction. It also means, except for coastal St. Johns County, and I want to emphasize that, coastal St. Johns County, I can't rule out maybe some tornadoes. But if you're not in coastal southeastern St. Johns County, for the rest of us, I'm not concerned about tornadoes. It's just going to be straight line winds, meaning and the winds will blow out of the north and northeast all night long. So think about if there's a side of your house that you're most concerned about, either because of something in the neighbor's yard, a house under construction, maybe some old trees. If they're off to your north and northeast and there's bedrooms on that side of the house, I'd say, let's take everyone out of those bedrooms and put them in another place. Either in the hallway, or if there's any bedrooms on the southern or southwest side of the building, would be a much better place to be. Downstairs better than upstairs. But I think yeah, if you can get some rest, and you're concerned, just don't put yourself on the most sensitive side of the home you're in, and that's going to be on the north and northeast side of the home.
Okay, that's good to know. I've told my kids I left a blow-up mattress and told them to sleep in the hallway, away from the windows, just to be safe. I was covering Helene in Waycross, Georgia, just less than 2 weeks ago, and there were a lot of trees that ended up on homes. Some of them came through. We want to invite all of you watching on YouTube and First Coast News Facebook page and our First Coast News Weather Watchers page to type your questions in the chat below. We've got them pulled up, and we're going to be asking Tim some of these questions. And Tim, Nikki has this question. She's heard the word describing Milton as an unprecedented storm. Her specific question is, she understands Gulf waters are warmer and we had a nor'easter, but how does this storm go from a Cat 1, she said, to a Cat 4 in less than 24 hours? And actually, I think that rapid intensification went from a tropical storm to a Cat 5 on the same day.
Exactly.
How's that happen?
Exactly, Cat 5. So no doubt about it, a big deal, but I do want to make sure we're defining unprecedented correctly. So first of all, unprecedented in its rapid intensification for an October hurricane. One other one did it in the Gulf of Mexico, and that was Wilma. And that eventually crossed South Florida, but it really pounded the Yucatan. But still, just those two now. So how does that happen? Well, remember, heat doesn't just make us sweat. Heat really is a measure of potential energy. So the warmer the waters are, and the Gulf of Mexico in October, especially where this formed deep down in the Bay of Campeche, in fact, extreme southwestern Gulf of Mexico. If you would have asked me in January, Tim, if you're most concerned about a rapid intensifying hurricane in October, where would it have to form? And this one formed about exactly there. And so basically, the warmer the waters are, the more potential there is for hurricanes to become strong. And if all the other ingredients are there, and that basically means a lot of moist air, and there was, and then an upper level high on it. And what I mean by that is a tropical cyclone is like any other low pressure system on Earth. Every other low pressure system on Earth, the stronger the winds are at 30,000 feet, the stronger this low is going to be. A hurricane is the exact opposite. Not only does it need very light winds above it, but it actually needs high pressure. In other words, whereas the hurricane's winds on the surface are blowing counterclockwise, it needs high pressure above it where it's going in the opposite direction. It needs to have an anticyclone. And that's exactly what happened, and this happened. But if you think about it, it's been that kind of a year. I mean, Burl was the earliest Cat 5 that has ever formed in our part of the world in human history, and that's because the Atlantic and then the Caribbean this year and last year were the warmest they've ever been. And sure enough, not every system that goes over those waters come together, but when the ingredients are right, and they were, then unfortunately we get these Cat 5s. I hope, a eye-opener for a lot of us that we need to be really thinking about why are these oceans getting warmer, and then what those warm oceans and Gulf waters do. I could go on about that all night long, but have another question.
All right, Tim. So we have some specific questions. Several of our viewers are wanting to know about San Marco. You know, this is a part of Jacksonville that we've seen flood over and over and over again. And so a couple of folks are asking, how bad can we expect the flooding and storm surge to get in San Marco, and particularly in the San Marco Square area? Okay,
so for San Marco, and really for that matter, most areas that are impacted by the St. John's, both as far as how high up is the St. John's going to be, like is it going to flood, but also the higher the St. John's is and your drainage is impacted from heavy rains. In other words, the higher the St. John's is, the less it can handle rainwater going into the drainage areas. San Marcos, south side of States, places all the way across on the other side of the River Ortega, up toward Ken Knight Drive, Trout River, along Heckscher Drive. There's a lot of numbers I could throw at you, but basically think 4 feet. Before the river gets to 4 foot, 1, 2, 3 feet, it's for the most part not going to get out of its banks. But it's still a big deal. If we have heavy rain and it's at 1, 2, or 3 feet above, that means the roads just can't drain. And so San Marco and other areas are going to flood. But it's primarily going to be a street flooding event, maybe getting to the doors of some businesses. If we get to that 4 foot level, at the same time we're having heavy rain, then it's a whole nother scenario. Then we can get 1 to 2 feet of water, if not more, into homes and into businesses. So what we're going to be watching tonight between midnight and 6 is that threshold, because we're going to be at high tide on the river in that general time frame, 4 a.m. It's when some of our heaviest rains are going to be. So it's going to be close during the midnight to 6 a.m. period, certainly for the San Marco area. I would expect there's going to be street flooding. I think the big question is, will it get into businesses? Now, it's also another reason why I talked about Irma earlier. And we do not expect this to be an Irma. I understand why people were asking. It's like Irma in that this is a major hurricane. It is coming from the Gulf of Mexico. However, Irma took over 2 days to cross the peninsula from southwest north to northeast. That is to us. Whereas this hurricane, I wouldn't be surprised. Let's do the math. Made landfall at 8:30, could be offshore by 6, 10 hours. So there just won't be the accumulative effect of both storm surge and rainfall that we had from Irma. So to me, that's good news. It's not going to be as bad as Irma was. I would love to say there isn't going to be any flooding, but I do think there's going to be street flooding, to your question specifically, in San Marco. As far as if it's going to be enough to get into homes and businesses, I'd give that about a 20 or 30% chance. So I don't think it's likely, but I can't rule it out quite yet.
And I remember, Tim, I think it was after Irma when we saw significant flooding in the downtown area, but then across the First Coast, we had to watch those high tides for several days. We know the storm's going to be out of here by Thursday afternoon. Could we continue to see potential flooding in the coming days?
Yeah, great question. And I think Heather's alluding to what we all were aware of, and that is, first of all, when the water gets into what we call the St. John's water basin, from high tide, from rising seas, then all of that fresh water, it's got a very narrow mouth, and so it takes a while for that to get out. In fact, when we have 2 high tides and 2 low tides every day, it kind of really sloshes back and forth, and so it does take a long time. But in addition to the fact that if there was no additional rainfall, that in itself would take a long period of time. But, and I think what Heather's alluding to is, remember, the St. John's River flows from south to north. And so those amazing rains that have already hit St. Pete, I wouldn't be surprised now if we're going to hear St. Pete got 20 inches in one day.
Wow.
Those type of rains, maybe not quite that heavy, but those type of rains are going to be falling on the St. John's watershed south of us. And that's all going to be pouring into the St. John's. Now, it's not going to cause a massive flash flood like you see in the mountains, but that does mean all of that water probably over the next month is going to have to get through the area. And so, yeah, I would suspect that even when the sun is out, we're going to have many sunny days where we're going to see water coming up through the drains. And of course, a greater concern will be, because it may take a month for that to drain, that if we have another heavy rain event, then we may be concerned about that double whammy.
Oh, let's hope we do not have that. Maddie and several of our other viewers on YouTube are asking about St. Johns County. And when you talk about St. Johns County, I know you've been very specific about southern St. Johns County versus northern St. Johns County, and then the coastal part of the county. Can you kind of break down the county for us? What are we expecting overnight into tomorrow in St. Johns County?
You bet. So by far, the worst combination, that is of heavy rain, of winds potentially gusting up to 65 or maybe even over 70 miles per hour, is going to be in the Volano Beach to St. Augustine to Crescent Beach area. That's where the windiest will be. Still going to be windy all the way up to Ponte Vedra Beach, but the windiest and the greatest risk of the storm surge up to 5 feet. So it's not Matthew, but still up to 5 feet. That would be in the St. Augustine Beach southward. Downtown St. Augustine, Davis Shores, then to me, you're next in line with that combination. Remember, high tide, the next high tide is going to be about 2 o'clock in the morning, and that's going to be at the height of some continued heavy rains and the gustiest of winds. So that's my biggest concern area. For the rest of St. Johns County, it's rainfall. And how does your area drain with rain, even if you're not concerned about tidal? I do think from the World Golf Village south, you're going to end up with some rainfall totals of maybe about 10 inches, whereas north of World Golf Village, things really drop off, and maybe you'll end up with about 2 to 4 inches. I think another way to put it, if you're in a new neighborhood in St. Johns County, let's say that's been built over the last 10 or 20 years, you probably have some pretty good drainage. And so my biggest concern for you are just the big trees there. If you're in an older part of St. Johns County where the drainage probably isn't so well, where maybe you were allowed to build closer to a wetland, then you do need to be aware of some flooding that will occur just plain from the rainfall, having nothing to do with tidal.
What about, Albert's asking about Lake City. Columbia County was an area we saw got a lot of trees down during Hurricane Helene less than 2 weeks ago. Is there a threat for our friends in Lake City?
Breathe easy. In fact, for those of you in Lake City, I think any rain you're having is going to end within about an hour. You're going to wake up in the morning with a north breeze and might see temperatures in the upper 50s. You deserve to have a nice breeze, and Lake City, you're looking that way. And while we're talking about Lake City, I have to talk about Ware County and Waycross. Nice cool breeze tonight. In fact, you're probably going to see stars before dawn comes. So at least for those of you that were hit hardest with Debbie and Helene, you are going to get off nice and easy.
Okay, Tim, I know we're going to get an 11 o'clock update from the National Hurricane Center, and you've got to get ready for our newscast. But any final thoughts? You've been forecasting storms for decades. Where do you put Hurricane Milton in all the storms you've covered?
So for that's a great question. I'll tell you what. Let's wait until it's out of here. But I will say, not as bad as Matthew and Irma, but still certainly a significant event. And just as a reminder, folks, all it takes is one tree in an inopportune time. So hopefully everyone's just going to stay inside for the rest of the night through the early morning hours. I do think even our skies will start getting brighter by about noon. So if anybody can just hunker down, try to put up with your brother and sister till about the noon hour, and I think we'll all be in much better shape.
Are my kids listening? I see them on the ring camera outside. I said, get inside now. I hope they are listening. Tim, thank you and all of our meteorologists for all the hard work you're doing, keeping everyone safe. We're going to have complete team coverage coming up in about 30 minutes on First Coast News. And you can also watch online through the First Coast News app and firstcoastnews.com. But we will continue to update you right here on Facebook, on YouTube, on First Coast News Plus. And from all of us here at First Coast News, please stay safe, heed those warnings, and keep it right here on First Coast News. We're on your side. We'll keep you updated. Tim, thanks so much.
Thank you
for joining us.